Now, I was very puzzled by these, but I read up on it and I found out that the Earth's atmosphere, because it has certain gases in it, absorbs certain frequencies more than others. So this varies with what altitude you're at. So if you're in the very high atmosphere, this effect will be very low. But as you go deeper down to sea level, then these notches get deeper and deeper. Just to let you all know about the roadmap for the Filmverse plugin. If you go to the website, there's a new page called Project Update. Here, Jai details some of the planned updates. You'll see that there are new film stock implementations and a custom display rendering transform that are under development. These and other features all focused on improving the plugin performance. If you want to grab the plugin at a discounted rate, now's the time to do so. In the description below, you can find links to the festive season discounts and other special offers. Hi there, welcome to the next video. We're going to be talking about grading monitors, and rather than just answer the question about which monitor to buy, I'm going to give a broader picture and hopefully arm you with the tools you need to, in the long term, choose monitors, and give you a bit of history about all the different types of monitor technology we've been through. So essentially we're talking about the medium on which we are making our art, our medium of communication, and there are many different types. So what are we actually doing when we create an image, when we grade an image, when we process photography through our computers? We rendering, drawing, we're creating an image, right? We are making a picture. And in that sense, we are making a rendition, a simulacrum of an image that we see out in the world, or a story that we want to convey. Now, the reason why I'm putting this in here is that lots of color science and kind of the approach of manufacturers is to sell you on the idea that it's just like real life. It's so real. But be careful with that, because it's always an image. It's never real life, and they're very real differences. So yeah, let's have a look. Pretty much from post-World War II, the 50s and 60s, all the way through to the present, let's call it 60 or 70 years worth. These are the various types of displays we've been through. Obviously, film projectors are the great granddaddy of everything. Then we had CRTs, LCDs, plasmas, OLEDs, LEDs, DLPs, lasers, and quantum dot. Lots of different technology. And what's interesting is that they aren't all separate. They actually overlap, and I'll show you how these all have intermeshed to make the various displays that we work on. I'd like to first ask the question, is the canvas black or white? So if you're painting a picture, you go to the art shop and you buy a canvas, it's normally white, and you maybe put some white paint on it, and then you'll start painting your scene. It could be black. You could paint it all black first and then use white to draw your sketch. So essentially what we're asking is, are we in an additive or a subtractive color system? Do we have a bright light source or a white page and we're darkening it down to increase its absorption? Or do we have something that's completely off, completely black, and we're increasing its brightness to create an image? You'll see how when we talk about backlights and RGB glass and all the layers within a monitor, you'll see how this manifests itself in various ways. As a broader theoretical concept, it's good to just keep in mind. It's always good to ask yourself, what is the light source? So if you're painting a picture, what's the light source? It's whatever light's in the room. And if the sun goes down and then you turn on the room light, it's a different light source now. So also like a Kindle, it's an electronic device. It's e-paper. It updates itself. You can scroll, you can do everything, but it has no light source. So it is also illuminated by the environment. But a film projector, that is a bulb shining through a piece of film. TV, well, many different types, and we'll talk about those. So just think about what is the light source in each situation. I'm going to give lots of references to Wikipedia, so you can dive in and look at these pages further. So there's lots of information about backlights in monitors. And something to mention, just some broader concepts here, is in terms of illumination and how lights are classified, through many years, hundreds of years, there's been these standard illuminants, A, B, C, D, and E. And they keep getting updated to incorporate different types of lighting technology that come around. So starting off, obviously, was the most basics, things like tungsten lights, because those were the first artificial lights. assuming we're ignoring flame here. B, C with different types of daylight. Then D was our standard midday, and all these different illuminants. You can look through here and you can see that even later on. So E is a theoretical illuminant. It theoretically has equal power at every frequency. Quite an interesting type of light. And then as fluorescents came out, this illuminant F series, and then obviously as LEDs came along, then they got their own standards developed around them. When we're defining a light and talking about its quality, talking about its nature, we need to have the unit of measure is the spectral power distribution. So that's saying at which frequency does this light have power? So it's a measure of the light, it's the quality of the light, and how much power it has at each frequency. So as a visual example, this is an Osram 1K tungsten light, and you can see that basically it's like a heater, because off to the right here we've got infrared, on the left we've got ultraviolet. So this curve hasn't got to its peak yet, and we've exited the visual spectrum. So it's actually a heater, which also gives a bit of light. And you see this is very smooth. Note how there's power at every single frequency, and it tapers off in kind of a bell curve. Sunlight, that's just me pointing a spectrometer at the blue sky. So you can see it's biased towards blue, and it's got power at every single frequency. It's totally full, and you can see it extends off to the left into the ultraviolet, and obviously this side into the infrared. But what's strange is notice how it's got these notches. Now, I was very puzzled by these, but I read up on it and I found out that the Earth's atmosphere, because it has certain gases in it, absorbs certain frequencies more than others. So this varies with what altitude you're at. So if you're in the very high atmosphere, this effect will be very low. And as you go deeper down to sea level, then these notches get deeper and deeper. This would be a virtual studio. This is the LED wall, and you can see that there's only power in the spectrum where it's needed. Whereas the sunlight is it's a big nuclear explosion, and it's just blasting power out at every single frequency. So this is about efficiency as well, power usage, and quality of light, type of light. The SPD is very important. Take a look at this. This is me pointing at the blue sky with the window open, and then I close the window. And you can see on the UV end there, as the window pane comes in, it chops off. The infrared end also gets chopped a little bit. The visible spectrum mostly in the middle stays exactly the same, but what I want you to notice is the characteristic. All these notches stay exactly the same. The light source is going through a piece of glass or bouncing off something, but it is the source. So characteristics of the source stay present all the way through the process, even though there is absorption and reflections. This is that same sunlight on the same day landing on a white piece of paper. You can see it's more even, it's not so biased to blue. Now like a white framing board, it's not paper, and to the eye it looks a different color, and you can see that the spectrum, it absorbs here in the middle section around green and yellow, and it has a bluey magenta feel to it because it reflects more in the blue here and in the red end of the spectrum. For example, the light shining off the palm of my hand, so you can see it's biased to what we would say is red, and then the blue end is all attenuated, has been absorbed into my hand. Another example of some lights, keener flow lights, right? As you turn it on, this is the spectrum you get. So these essentially vacuum tubes, fluorescent tubes, high quality lighting tubes of, like say, 20 years ago. Once it's up to temperature, it's warm up, all those spikes go away. Very interesting to analyze these lights. But as far as I know, that people used to use certain magenta filters to notch out this green, which was characteristic of these types of gases which were in these tubes. So back to our 1K tungsten. Nowadays, we use the ARRI orbiter. Now, this is its 2800. That's a standard tungsten bulb of old. It's using 6 LEDs. So a blue, a cyan, a green, lime, amber, and red. And it's building any color temperature that you want from each of those elements. This is its 2800 Kelvin, 5600 Kelvin, and 10,000 Kelvin. And you can see how the ratios change. So this idea of SPDs, give you a quick run through, and now we'll talk about how they apply in monitors. So we have the light source itself, it has a spectral distribution. There might be reflection of or transmission through various filters or off certain surfaces. There are also chemical compounds that get used in monitors that phosphorescence. You just give them either electrical energy or light energy, and they phosphoresce at a particular frequency, at a particular color, we would say, from a human observer point of view. So that's a slightly different case. It's not just reflecting light. You give it energy and it puts out light at a certain frequency. And obviously that light has to be seen by someone or recorded by a camera. So then we need to talk about the sensitivity of the human observer or of a camera, etc., etc. Reflectance itself has certain characteristics, and just as the incoming spectrum will be absorbed in certain parts and reflected in other parts, each material has its properties. So a quick example here to say that this color chart, so let's look at this blue, green, and red. The blue would reflect in the blue area and absorb the others. The green would reflect in the middle, and the red would reflect in the center. And the gray patches, the white patch would reflect a lot, the black would reflect very little, and obviously the gray, all the gray patches somewhere in the middle. But all dependent on the incoming, this is the incoming spectrum, daylight, bouncing off and landing in our eye. So all these jaggies, these filtering through the atmosphere would all be present in the light that finally gets to our eye. So we have many mediums. We have books, we have cinema, we have paintings, we have print, and we have all different types of television and web and things now. So we need, in these various systems, we need to have quantifiable color mechanisms to give a certain visual stimulus to a human, and that they will say, oh, that's red, or that's green, or that's orange. We typically have three primary, mostly it's red, green, and blue. It could be different in printing, could be CMYK. Motion pictures, it's mostly R, G, and B. And we have developed systems to create certain color stimuli for people to see. Around about the 1920s and 1930s, research was done to quantify these tri-stimulus values that would create certain visual stimuli and would be equivalent to certain frequencies of pure light. And essentially what they came up with was the human observer. Here it's normalized because you could see that some actually had to have negative colors to get some of the more extreme colors, but it's a well-known kind of diagram of the human visual sensitivity under certain conditions. It must be caveated to say that. And prior to that is obviously the luminous efficacy function, which is even prior to those RGB models, which is just our sensitivity to various frequencies of lights. Based on that research, we essentially have a system called Metamerism. And the basic definition in colorimetry, Metamerism is a perceived matching of colors with different non-matching power spectral distributions. Colors that match in this way are called metamers. So a quick explanation is to say that the yellow balloon out in sunlight, it's getting full spectrum sunlight landing on it. It absorbs everything but what we would perceive as yellow, that range of frequency, bounces into our eye, and through to the sensitivity of the various cells in our eyes, we perceive a certain color and we'd say yellow. That's the yellow balloon. We could also have an image on a screen, but this screen is not broad spectrum, and it's definitely not this single variable spectrum. It can only put out red or green or blue light. And it's a combination of those three can make the same person in the same eye feel that they would say, oh, that's also a yellow picture of a yellow balloon on a screen. So those two are metamers of each other, even though the incoming light spectrum from the actual balloon under sunlight versus the balloon on the screen are actually wildly different. So this is basically the discovery that made all media actionable. Without this, you would actually have to have the sunlight and the balloon. We'd be stuck to stage plays if this couldn't be. Everything would have to be done for real in front of you. Now we can essentially store it, record it, and have simulacrums, combinations of primary colors that to mimic all other things that we see in the world. There's an issue called metameric failure. And especially when we talk about laser projectors, we'll bring that up more. There needs to be some measure of the metamerism, the effectiveness of it. And in the past, the color rendering index and other such measures are basically an indication of the purity of light And this is the media light, the backlights for a grading suite. There's a very high quality LED. This is their Mark III, and you can see that its CRI is up, 96 and 98, very high, which means that it has, even though it has this characteristic LED spike here, or most LEDs will always have this spike, its balance of frequencies across the whole range is very good, such that the CRI circle is filled out. You can see that there's slight dipping there, but generally speaking, very, very high quality light. So starting off in terms of cinema, where did we start off? We started off with film projection. There was essentially a bulb and film moving in front of it, and we were subtracting the white bulb light with the colored film to make various colors projected on a screen. There's great descriptions on the Wikipedia page about movie projectors. You can see Bill Hammack giving demonstrations on how the mechanism of a 16mm projector works. Fascinating. I'd highly recommend watching that video. But moving into the digital age, we had known as DLP, digital light processing projectors. And initially they were xenon bulbs, and this was the spectrum of a Christie xenon bulb projector. You can see that it's clearly got a blue primary, green primary, and red primary, but they're fairly broad. That's the thing to note here. And in terms of what this could make, it could pretty much cover the P3 color gamut and faithfully reproduce all colors inside of that. Over time, from the xenon arcs, there were attempts to use LED, but their brightness wasn't enough. And then obviously things have moved to laser now for efficiency, but we'll talk about issues with that. So obviously lasers, they are very narrow band frequency and very powerful. In the DLP projectors, whether it's laser or whether it's the traditional xenon arc, there's a complex array of, and you can look at these up on Wikipedia and on the web in general. There are lots from different manufacturers. There's red, green, and blue light sources, and there's dichroic filters which do splitting and combining. There's a chip, which is essentially a lot of micro mirrors that get positioned or not to reflect light for each pixel. It's quite a fascinating and quite complex. Once we move into the laser era, simpler laser projectors actually only have one laser, a blue laser, which shines for the blue. Obviously they'd use the laser straight. For the red and the green, they would shine onto phosphors, which get excited by the laser, but they emit either green or red light accordingly. So that's how the three colors would be made. Further, like higher cost lasers, which are more specialized, actually would have three separate red, green, and blue lasers, and there'd be no need for the phosphor. The reason why I'm going into detail here is because one of the main reasons, other than the power of lasers, was to get very pure primaries. So if you want to make this Rec 709, this RGB, this kind of smaller gamut triangle, then you can see that the purity of the green is not as much. Remember, we spoke about before that the colors in the middle here have power at several frequency bands. So it's more like a averaged spectral distribution. Whereas if you want to create colors on this edge here, they need to be very narrow band to be that pure. So just think of it as you move to the edge of this horseshoe, you need a very narrow band purity. If we're making Rec 709, which is this inner triangle, we don't need our green to be so pure. If we go to P3, which is the next one out here, we need way more purity and essentially more narrow band. But if we want to go all the way out here to Rec 2020, we have to narrow down even further. So take a look here. This is a Barco laser projector, the SPD, and you can see that's literally somewhere in the 400s here, 500s and the 600s. There's only power there, and there's no other light power being emitted. So you can see on this horseshoe, somewhere in the 400s, that's where our blue would be. Somewhere in the 500s, where the nanometers would be the green primary, and over here in the 600s would be the red primary. This is a consumer level short throw laser projector from JMGO, and you can see the same thing. Just one spike at each of the primaries and no power anywhere else. And just for comparison, that was our Christie xenon. See how broad the primaries are versus a laser, which is very tight. And I think, great, how efficient, wonderful. But unfortunately, it's not all win. Because you remember our human observer. We have sensitivities, the three color-sensitive cones in the eyes. We have these sensitivities, and obviously no two people are the same. We're not digital, we're biological, and the amounts of cells and distribution of cells differs person to person's age, sex, from what part of the world you're from, etc. So with broad spectrum light sources, these variances have very little difference because your sensitivity is still in a wide band. But if the light source is like a laser, it only has excitation at one specific frequency. And if your sensitivity varies slightly, then you'll see a different color. So this is known as metamerism failure. And this with wider and wider gamut displays, the metamerism failure, so the discrepancy that you and I will stand next to each other in the same room looking at the same monitor, and I'll say, oh, that's a bit pink, and you'll say, oh, that's a bit green. And it's just the physics of it. There's no way of getting around that. If we want broader gamuts, if we for some reason think Rec 2020 is a must-have, then we just have to live with the metamerism failure that will come with that. I'm going to answer the question first because I know it's going to be asked. Can you grade a movie on a home projector? The short answer is no, but just to look at it a little bit, if you, in the price range that you can probably afford at home, you will be getting an LCD projector. So it's an LED light source with an LCD RGB glass in front, which will be making your three colors. On the Wikipedia page, you can read up about it. The issues that you will run into, other than your environment, you have to make sure your environment is very dark, sealed of light, and very low reflectance all around. No use of having a white ceiling or white walls. It will ruin the experience, and your blacks will get very milky. You have to have a large enough screen because you need to create the experience. Part of the thing is the ratio of viewer to screen, that size. The projector needs to throw a big enough image. So the screen size and the throw, power to do that. You need enough lumens in the projector. You need to make sure that it can do the gamut. The white point, which is not D65, it's the DCI white point, which is a bit kind of around 6,200, but also yellow greener than we're used to in the 6500 monitors that are all normally calibrated to that. And also it's gamma 2.6. So is it powerful enough? Is the environment correct? Have you got the correct screen? And can you calibrate it? If you can answer all of those questions, then yes, you could theoretically do it. But I haven't seen it done successfully. So in terms of the cinema grading, there still is a bit of a ravine between grading movies for theatrical release versus grading just on a monitor. So in terms of history, why do we need to talk about cathode ray tubes? They're not in use anymore, but there's a little bit of history that I need to brush on so that you understand why we have certain legacy things that still live with us today. So cathode ray tubes, they essentially, it's a vacuum tube that contains an electron gun, which is firing a stream of electrons. The electrons get controlled by anodes, which steer them up, down, left, and right, and essentially it traces lines, which made the display. The electrons landed on the front surface were phosphors, red, green, and blue phosphors, and as they were hit by electrons of various amount, they glowed for a period of time, which created the image on the screen. This was the spectral distribution of the blue, green, and red. You can see the red is very, it's got kind of many separate spikes in terms of its frequency response. Sometimes the pixels were square or round, sometimes they were rectangular. It's very fascinating because it's very interesting technology. I mean, it's terribly unenvironmentally friendly, hard to recycle, lots of poisonous gases. So yeah, it had to go as a technology, but it's quite an engineering feat to see how these CRT screens functioned. What it has left us, though, is the standard of gamma 2.2 for standard definition. Now, television systems were always backward compatible, so something new came in, it had to always be backward propagated to older devices. So essentially we had this legacy, we mentioned this before, of the camera OETF and the monitor EOTF, which gave us our total OOTF, optical to optical transfer function of our system. Because of the move from CRTs at gamma 2.2, which were the basis of our whole industry, Then when LCDs came out, they needed an extra boost of gamma to push them down, a boost of 1.2, and this OOTF of 1.2 has actually stayed with us. So in Resolve, you'll see at the bottom here, when you're going to a display space, this is always ticked, and when you're going in reverse, the inverse is always ticked. So just to explain, CRTs are important because they're claws from history that still hook into what we do nowadays. The characteristics of CRTs had quite a nice glow to it. So if you're ever emulating a CRT, remember to put a glow on the monitor. And part of a monitor technology is how the light is actually shaped. Once you've got the right power of light, you've turned it into the right red, green, and blue primaries, you also need to steer it in terms of filtering or polarizing or gathering or spreading the light. There's a lot of that kind of technology in monitors, which affects things like viewing angle and other factors. Now, the post-CRT, the main, whether it's projectors or monitors, liquid crystals have had a huge, very wide-reaching effect. So you can have a look at the Wikipedia page. Liquid crystal display is a flat panel display or other electronically modulated optical device that uses light modulating properties of liquid crystals combined with polarizers to display information. So I always remember these were the watches to have when I was young, but then over time you can read the background and the developments in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, how these became to be the mainstream of monitors after CRTs died out. One critical term is TFT, which is thin film transistor, which is basically the address system. So the grid of rows and columns that could be individually addressed for red, green, and blue. So not only per pixel, but within each pixel you had 3 subpixels, the red, green, and blue subpixels, and those could be individually addressed and individually dimmed or brightened depending on how the image needed to show various amounts of light. Another term that you'll see in respect to LCDs is IPS, in-plane switching. Now this is how you get your bit depth, how you change brightness. It's the most important thing essentially, and you'll see that on the Wikipedia page, you'll see lots of developments throughout history. And essentially, if you've got light coming through without any charge applied, the liquid crystals which are floating in here, they do not line up. So they do not allow light through because of polarization. Once you apply the voltage, then all the crystals line up in a straight line, and hence the polarized light can travel through. And the varying amounts of completely lining up or halfway or any particular amount gives you essentially your variability of transparency, which gives you your 8-bit, 10-bit, and all your graduation or resolution on your red, green, and blue channels. On this liquid crystal display Wikipedia page, there's a very nice video on how an LCD works and an active matrix structure. This is again the engineering guy. A wonderful video which can explain a lot about this monitor technology. A typical run-of-the-mill laptop screen would have an SPD of something like this. It's a typical LED, because it's LED backlight, so it's got the spike in blue, and you can see that the red, and firstly there's, we don't have a peak here around about 600, we just have this kind of two-headed blob in the middle around about 500. So again, very low color gamut, low color precision, and cheap, efficient, that being the priority on a non-color critical display. Asus ProArt, so that's a combination of things here, where it's actually mini or micro LED backlight, then an RGB LCD glass to do the color dimming, would have way better separation. You can see it's clear red, green, and blue peaks. The different one from their series, these both in their native profile, so you can see that the white balance, the ratios between red, green, and blue in their native uncalibrated situation would be different. And then this is a TV Logic, the LUM310X, which had also three clear primaries, although the red had a non-smooth primary. It's a dual layer LCD, so this gives you an example of how wide-reaching this LCD technology is. Broadly speaking, all these monitors have what's known as an RGB glass sandwich that can separate into 3 channels, has 3 windows for each pixel, and control the brightness from completely on to completely off through 10-bit or 8-bit range. So you're subtracting from the white of the backlight to create various colors. Just to talk a little bit about backlight technology, because it is important, and nowadays there's some important options. So again, have a look at the Wikipedia page. It's all there. Quite surprisingly, backlights mostly actually sat on the edge of the screen. And you can see a nice video. On that same page, you can see a video about how the LCD backlights work, and how essentially we have an edge light, one strip of LEDs which fill a chamber through various diffusion and spreading techniques, diffusion and reflection, such that the whole screen appears even white. This obviously saves a lot of power, and structurally it's way easier. Another type would be fixed LED backlights that are all on all the time, spread out evenly across the monitor area at the back behind the RGB LCD glass. But more common now, and this was an attempt to get darker blacks and brighter whites simultaneously. We need the power of LEDs, but we don't want them on all the time. So local dimming was something that came in. So if you have a look at this image of this sunset, you can see that in the area of the trees it's pretty dark. So you can see the backlights. The pixels in the image are in the millions, but the pixels in the backlight itself are in the thousands, or there might only be 1,000 or 500 backlights in the entire image. So it's a much larger area, and there could be several 100,000 pixels sitting above one backlight. But generally speaking, that area will be dimmed down. The backlight will be dimmed down. And in this area of the sun where we need a lot of brightness, obviously the backlight can be pushed up to maximum. The downside of this technology, and it has improved a lot, is that you get glowing, because the pixels of the backlight are huge, whereas the pixels of the actual fine detail. And the part where the type of images where it really showed up was star fields, where it's a black background with small dots of bright light. They always had a bit of a glow around them. The algorithms for calculating the backlight value have improved a hell of a lot. It has got better, but this is the downside of this local dimming, full array local dimming technology. So you'll see lots of tech reviews talking about, is it good, is it bad? It's just one phase of technology which I think we might be moving beyond. It might be on its way out, generally speaking. Maybe the pinnacle of complexity was these dual layer LCDs. So we had a backlight of micro LEDs, or a light source which was always on at full. Then we had a monochrome layer of LCDs which did pixel by pixel dimming. Then you had another RGB glass or LCD sandwich which did the R, G, and B dimming. So you had two dimming layers. Now, one of the downsides, you could get right next to each on a pixel that was 100% white and a pixel that was 100% black. You could do that now. You didn't have this blooming associated with the full aperture local dimming displays. But the downside, because it was so complex with so many layers, the viewing angle of the screens was poor. And as you got off axis, not only the brightness changed, but the color varied a little bit too. So I used these monitors for quite a while. I still think they're good. But yeah, each technology has its strengths and weaknesses. Interesting to note, in any era, but in this era particularly, Sony, FSI, TV Logic, and EZO all used the same technology. So it was the same batch which came from the same manufacturer. These bigger manufacturer companies, either in Japan or in Korea. Used to be in Taiwan, but less now, but mostly in Korea now. They make a batch of all the same type of technology, and that gets rebranded, bought up by Sony, and turned, the menu structure, the color science, all the functionality, the casing, all of that gets customized by all these companies. But underneath it, it's actually the same technology. So it's good to go to the tech shows. In Taiwan, there's a show called Touch Taiwan, which actually is more the upper level manufacturers, where you get to see the products that will get fed into all these manufacturers which we deal with as customers. Interesting to note these larger trends. Just to note a technology that kind of came and went, plasma. It also started off around about the 60s. A plasma display panel is a type of flat panel display that uses small cells containing plasma ionized gas that responds to electric fields. So each of these chambers had the gas in it, and each of the chambers also had phosphor coating. So in a sense, it was quite a lot like a CRT. And its spectral response was also quite similar to a CRT because it was also using phosphors of various phosphorescence at different frequencies. And from what I remember, the look of the plasma displays was actually a lot like a CRT. It also had that glow to it. But yeah, this is a technology that didn't survive. One of the big trends now is these OLED displays, which are already well into maturing as a technology, I would guess. OLED, and an organic light-emitting diode, also known as an organic electroluminescent diode, is a type of light-emitting diode in which the emissive electroluminescent layer is an organic compound film that emits light in response to an electric current. So what's interesting here is you don't need a backlight. You put current in and the substance emits at a certain frequency. So you get three different types, the reddish type, the greenish type, and the bluish type. And you can just, through those TFT matrices, stimulate those certain areas by a certain amount, and they will glow depending on how much current you add. So this is more like an additive, truly additive, that can turn all the way off. Whereas a backlight displays, you've got to find a way to, you've got power in the backlight, you've got to find a way to dim it, you've got to subtract from that backlight. Where this is more like an additive situation where it's off, you've got zero. If you've got no current, you've got no light. But as you wind up the current, then the current goes up. The issue on early OLEDs was that takeoff from zero, that fine gradient into those very darker values. They kind of just dropped off too quickly. But from what I understand, that has been solved largely. That's earlier generations had that issue. The mainstay of the industry, especially as HDR came in, was the Sony X300. They're totally out of production, but people hang on to them and try and keep them alive. They're very good OLED monitors, and in terms of the upper end, Hollywood and in Europe, they're still very highly regarded. Other monitors like this CM250 from FSI, also an OLED, an iPhone, so mostly also OLED. This is an iPhone 13. You can see very clear red, green, and blue primaries. Great for producing colors. This is the LG C9 from 2019. And it's got 4 pixels. It's red, green, and blue, and a white pixel. Because at this stage, the OLEDs couldn't go bright enough. So OLED can give you good color up to about 200-300 nits, but it couldn't go all the way up to the 1,000 nits that we were trying to make for HDR. So their solution was to add a white pixel, because those specular highlights didn't need so much saturated color. So there'd be a combo effect, and you got a bit of a well-saturated color space that narrowed in the upper regions. So yeah, it's a technology that's kind of on its way out now that other options have come in. LEDs, and you've probably heard of mini LEDs and micro LEDs. I think this is quite a strong technology that will be around for a long time. So initially, also in the 60s, we started off with these very large LEDs. But over time, we've gone into mini and micro as they've been scaled down and used in displays. LEDs are very powerful. They can emit a lot of light. I've showed before, this is from a virtual studio. You can see the separate primaries. In terms of other applications of LEDs, like standard office lighting or home lighting, this is an office panel, light panel in a standard office. You can see the peak at blue, and then this second broader peak in the middle. These are these kind of, one step above Christmas lights, these strip lights that come with a little color controller, and you might glue it on the bottom of your car and drive around at night. That kind of thing. That also has this very typical LED SPD, or the high end, which I mentioned already, like the Arri Orbiter, which is narrowband LED, 6 narrowband LEDs, which get combined in various amounts to make any particular color. I think there's a fair amount of possibility for cinemas to ultimately become micro LED walls, but there's issues with sound that need to be solved. But yeah, I could see that happening within 5 to 10 years. but projector technology is also still very, is progressing with lots of advancements, so hard to tell. Obviously, virtual production is the area where LEDs shine because it's out of focus, so the lower resolution doesn't matter so much. You need the power of LEDs and other such things. It's an area that's still very much in its infancy, and people are still experimenting with it. Just to give you an example, Brompton, who's one of the leading technologists in that area, they are going in the other direction. They're actually going what used to be red, green, and blue separate 3 primary LEDs. They're now introducing a white, so they RGBW, just like the LG OLEDs that I showed you, because if it's light coming from the back wall and landing on skin or landing on people, if it's just RGB, it's actually very poor quality light, and skin looks very weird, looks like pinky and a bit bad. So you can actually change the frequency response and fill in the middle here, in between the peaks. You obviously get lower color gamut, but in terms of a background, like a hot desert or something, you don't need wide saturation. You just need the power, and you need good color rendition. Remember, the idea of CRI is that all frequencies are filled in rather than one frequency's, biased and got a lot of power where other frequencies have none. And maybe the biggest breakthrough, well, the current leading monitor technology of the last few years is quantum dots. And they've appeared also, these technologies, there'll be a bit of LED plus LCD glass plus some quantum dots. There's often combinations of all these technologies. You can look at the Wikipedia page. Quantum dot display is a display device that uses quantum dots, semiconductor nanocrystals, which can produce pure monochromatic red, green, and blue light. So you see the purity, can do wide gamut. You excite it, and then it just emits of that specific primary color. Photoemissive quantum dot particles are used in LED backlights or display color filters. Quantum dots are excited by the blue light from the display panel, so that's the backlight, and emit pure basic colors. And so this reduces light losses, color crosstalk in color filters, and improving display brightness and color gamut, which is obviously where the trend is. People want to move to that Rec 2020 full gamut, and then also up to the 1,000 nits or 2,000 nits. Many would say it's unnecessary, and for the actual amount of image area that needs to go that bright, it's hard to justify. But yeah, quantum dot is very much the interesting technology now. Another technology that's grown out of that is QNED. Further development of QD OLED displays is quantum dot nanorod emitting diode display, which replaces the blue OLED layer with IGAN or GAN blue nanorod LEDs. The nanorods have a larger emitting surface compared to the planar LED. So instead of a flat plane, it's actually a rod which can emit in 360 degrees. And as far as I know, these are actually also printed on. So in terms of the manufacture process, it's quite interesting. It's more like a printer, 3D printer kind of thing that prints these displays. You can see the SPD of the QD OLED, also clearly defined primaries and quite narrow to give the bigger color gamut. You'll see lots of discussion online, QD OLEDs versus WOLEDs. Obviously the new trend, manufacturers are trying to sell these new QD OLEDs. They're trying to prove how, it's always like this. There's always a new trend, and you've got to talk smack about the old version just to sell your products. It's literally a situation, don't believe the hype. Just, watch, don't rush in too quickly. You'll see, people are talking about the WOLED structure versus the QD OLED, close-ups on the pixel structure. It's all interesting discussion, but yeah, these trends come and go very quickly. So when considering a monitor, finally getting to the crux. So that was all our background. Now when we get to the crux of the video, the actual which monitor to choose and how to choose it, there are lots of features. You need to consider the physical size of the monitor. If you've got a small room, don't buy a 65-inch monitor. 30 might be perfect. It's how far it's going to be away from you. You don't want to be doing this, or if you actually need, clients sitting at a couch a little bit back from you and you want them a bit further away, then sure, 56, 65 inch, that might actually work. So size, in terms of viewing distance and room size. The resolution that you need 4K and 8K. You can't actually buy HD monitors anymore. That's a thing of the past. Quite hilarious. What peak brightness do you need? Are you doing HDR or are you doing SDR? The color gamut, the type of technology, and that is important in terms of metamerism. So if your GUIs are all one type of technology and your master monitor is going to be a different type of technology, and if you're very sensitive, some colorists are very sensitive to this, and also, you know, they want everything to look the same. You're literally going to drive yourself mad, because it's the metamerism metamerism failure of the narrow band primaries in your eye, and there's nothing you can do to change that other than getting all your monitors the same. You can shift white points to get it slightly closer. They are metamerism matching processes, but it'll never be 100%. And that is just the nature of the different light source and the different frequency bands. So if I'm not so sensitive to that, I'm fine. I can say, ignore this monitor, focus on this color. That's fine. That's no discordance in my head. But some colorists want everything to look the same. And so I would highly recommend all technologies to stay the same type of technology. Yeah, contrast ratio, and bear in mind that contrast ratio can be measured dynamically and statically, especially for local dimming, full aperture local dimming displays. That's an issue. Does the monitor have calibration support? Do you have access to a calibrator? Do you have your own calibration equipment? These are all important decisions. Power usage, and I say that because often people want to say, oh, can I use a consumer monitor? And the question is, there's lots of auto power controls which actually dim your brightness because the power usage gets too much. So is that a good thing on a pro grading monitor? Obviously not. So can those be disabled, and where do those limits lie? You know, things like viewing angle and the light shaping technology that I was talking about. If you move left, right, up and down, does the image change? Then actual 8-bit or 10-bit, there is this thing called dithering, where it's actually an 8-bit monitor, but the bits can be dithered to give you intermediate resolution. But ideally, you should have a 10-bit display for color, precise color grading work. And uniformity is a big issue. You know, these wonderful QD-OLED or OLED displays, everyone loves them, but if you take 10 of them and you line them up, you'll say, oh, that one's different to that, or the left corner on that one's different to the right corner on that one. So uniformity is a big issue. And from what I've heard on some ranges, it's literally just luck of the draw. People sending back and changing monitors to get one that's uniform. That is an issue to be aware of. What are you using it for? Are you grading alone, or is it always remote? Do your clients actually come to your suite? Do they want to sit with you side by side? Are you in a suite where you'd have several, you have your monitor and a client monitor? So these are all different specifications for different setups. Do you need SDR and HDR, the size of your suite, and compatible technology? I would say are some of the main things to be aware of. Obviously, everyone's going to ask, can you get away with using a consumer monitor? Or I heard that a top facility was using LG TVs in all their suites, so surely I can do that. And the answer is yes, you can. The one thing is you have to factor in the calibration costs. So you hire a pro calibrator to come twice a year and just factor that into the cost. Once a month if you can afford it, if the monitor drifts, but at least once or twice a year. You might need to buy a LUT box as well to hold a 3D calibration LUT, and you need to make sure that you can disable all the auto brightness or all the other auto features which come default on these consumer level monitors. So yeah, it's kind of a yes, but with some caveats. You've got to be careful. So the short answer is, if you want to buy a monitor now, it's either OLED or QD-OLED, I would say, unless you need to specifically have LCD or something that matches for metamerism reasons to other technology. That would be the one caveat there. But yeah, QD-OLED is really impressive. It can go up to 1,000 nits in some cases. Very wide color gamut, super dark blacks, none of the local dimming, those kind of issues. So yeah, great technology. But yeah, don't rush into it. Don't worry about fear of missing out. It's literally 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. There'll be new stuff coming out, and there'll be lots of hype. There'll be lots of sales pitches and things like that. Just sit back, move slowly, and when you really need to commit to a monitor, ask for lots of advice, do tests, see the monitor in action first, see it with your own eyes before you actually pay the money, ideally. Yeah, don't believe the hype. So another broader things to look at, there are other market forces at play. I mean, we think, wow, you want to have this amazing color grading monitor and it's so important to you, but you've got to be aware that in terms of the world scale, professional color grading monitor is a tiny market. It's amazing that people even bother, to be honest, because the technology is changing all the time. The requirements are super high. Customers are super fussy. And, why bother? Because there are not that many facilities and no one's willing to pay that much. So you've got to look at where the broader trends in the industry are. Like what is happening on phones and tablets? What is car dashboards are now soon going to all be screens. These are obviously much bigger, much more stable markets. So in terms of where, is it going to be QD OLED or OLED or mini LED, micro LED, which is the technology that's actually going to rise to this top and stay for a longer time? That depends on these bigger markets rather than us in the kind of the pro image making end of things. But the domestic market is way bigger in terms of quantities and in terms of actual revenue and turnover. So we often do get swung by that. And just bear in mind, if you're a professional monitor manufacturer, it's not a couple of years. It's a 10 to 15 year cycle from the point to which you commit to a certain technology. It goes into production and research, finally comes off the production line, huge quantities, then get, cut to size, broken into branded as your product, and finally make it to market. It's a huge time period. So yeah, these cycles are constantly rolling, and something that had to have $30,000 monitor is now today's dinosaur. Firstly, you would never pay that much because QD OLED is 1/3 to 2/3 of that price for a monitor that's way better on almost all specifications. So there often are these step changes, big step changes in the market. So yeah, it's again, don't be hasty. Just follow longer trends rather than these quicker impulses. Yeah, I hope that helps in your choosing a monitor, but rather just get the popcorn out and sit and watch this whole thing play out rather than jumping in too much, because it's very turbulent and it's literally changing every 6 months. Hope that helps. See you next time.